6 days before the Passover celebration began, Jesus arrived in Bethany, the home of Lazarus, the man he had raised from the dead. A dinner was prepared in Jesus' honor. Mary served, and Lazarus was among those who ate with him. Then Mary took a 12-ounce jar of expensive perfume made from the essence of nard, and she anointed Jesus' feet with it, wiping his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance. But Judas Iscariot, the disciple who would soon betray him, said, "That perfume was worth a year's wages. It should have been sold and the money given to the poor." Not that he cared for the poor. He was a thief, and since he was in charge of the disciples' money, he often stole some for himself. Jesus replied, "Leave her alone. She did this in preparation for my burial. You always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me."
A few years ago, I read a book. It was entitled "What They Did Not Teach You in Seminary," written by a pastor. I found it very, very profitable. I liked it very much. He was right on a lot of those things. I'd been in ministry quite a while, and when I read the book, and I can just testify that he knew what he was talking about. One chapter was missing, though. And the one chapter that I would have written if I was going to write the book was, you're going to have to learn to enjoy kids' birthday parties. I didn't know that. They never taught me that in Bible college or seminary. And so when I got into ministry, I started getting invited to kids' birthday parties. And what I learned very quickly was I had a lot of fun at them because I knew what was going to happen. You and I both have seen this, haven't we? The kid is overstimulated. He's got more gifts than Toys R Us sitting in front of him. He's got all this wrapping, and everybody's hovering over him and oohing and awing at everything. And eventually what happens? He opens his gifts, or she opens her gifts. Everyone has cake. And then you look around, and where do you see the kid? They're sitting in the box that the gifts came in. They've picked out a box big enough for them, and they're sitting in. I'm not a psychologist, but my training has told me I know exactly why the kid's in the box. He's just trying to calm everybody down and himself. It's way too much. A pastor wrote about this. Paul David Tripp said he and his wife went all over Tarnation trying to find the perfect gift because their kid would always unwrap the gift and play with the box. And they were trying to break him of that. So they got the best gift they could think of. And on Christmas morning, they gave it to him and he unwrapped it and they were holding their breaths. And he took out the toy and he started playing with the toy and they were so happy. And Tripp said, I went and got a cup of coffee and when I came back, the kid was in the box. The gift of grace that is Jesus Christ is overwhelming. And sad to say, there are many who take the gift of Jesus and then just become content with the box. And that's what we have here. Judas was given the gift of the grace of Jesus Christ up close and personally, unlike anyone else except the other 11 on the earth. And Judas chose just to play with the box, as it were. And that's why we have this conversation between Judas and Jesus, this misappropriation of values that goes on, where Judas is valuing the wrong things, and he has every reason not to, but chooses to anyway. His reaction reminds us of human beings, and we react with extraordinary blindness and hard-heartedness. Mary and Jesus here reminds us that God has plans that supersede our inability to understand the grace and the mercy of God. There's a couple of notes I want to give you about this passage. You may know that there are 3 other passages where this takes place. There's a problem. One of the passages, namely the one in Luke chapter 7, talks about a lady of sinful nature. She was probably a prostitute. She came and did kind of the same thing. The 2 differences. One is Mary, the one we're studying now, was not known to be a prostitute. The second thing was Mary lived in the southern part of the nation down near Jerusalem in a town called Bethany. The lady that wept on Jesus' feet, dried him with her tears, then anointed them with expensive perfume, that happened in the northern part where Jesus was from in Galilee. So I don't want you to get confused, because you may read the other passage and you think, wait a minute, this is different than what I read, because it's a different story. This story is repeated in the other 2 Gospels, though, not Luke, but Matthew and Mark. And so what you have here is 2 different things happening. Some people say, well, it's actually 3 events. You can argue with that. I don't care. But the one in Luke 7 with the prostitute is not the one that we're talking about today. And that's the most important idea. I just don't want you to be confused. The first person that we see that I want us to look at is Mary, who's the sacrificer here. And Mary comes and does an extraordinary thing that's amazing. And I heard about a pastor who was discipling a young man who worked at a car dealership. He was a salesman. And the salesman finally came to the pastor one day in his office and said, I got to stop coming to church. And the pastor was alarmed. He said, well, why? He said, well, I just feel like a hypocrite, because I love coming to church. I feel comfortable here at the church. I feel loved here at the church. I'm growing in my faith in Jesus Christ at the church, but I'm not behaving right the rest of the time. And the pastor thought a minute and asked him, now, he said, where do you work? And he goes, well, at the car dealership. But where in the car dealership do you work? He said, well, I work up front. And so the pastor said, what's that place called where all the cars are displayed? And the salesman said, you mean the showroom? Yeah, the showroom. So you work in the showroom? He said, yeah. He said, okay, what's that area right behind the showroom? He said, that's the parts department. I said, okay, what's the area at the back of the building? He goes, that's the service department. He said, well, what if I told you after I bought a car from you, I came back in and said it ain't working right? What would you tell me to do? You would tell me to go around and go to the service department, because that's what the service department is for, to fix your car. He said, the problem you're having is that you're looking at the church and you're thinking the church is the showroom. It's not the showroom. The church is the service department. That is what the church does. Helping people get back in running order with God. That's what the church is all about. We don't need people to show up and display as we're in a showroom. We're all needing service, every single one of us. Mary understood this. Mary understood it wasn't about casting a shadow. It wasn't about showing off. It wasn't about causing and calling attention to herself. It was about Jesus, because Jesus had done some amazing things in her life, and he deserved all this. And she wanted to know more about Jesus. We know a lot about Mary. She shows up in 3 parts of the Gospels. The first part is she's at the house with her sister Martha and her brother Lazarus, and Jesus is there. And we read there in Luke 10, Jesus and his disciples were on their way, came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary. And here's what we know about Mary. What did she do? She sat at his feet and listened to what he said. Now there's a story there about Martha getting ticked off because Mary's supposed to be helping. Jesus gently rebukes Martha and says she's right where she's supposed to be. Leave Mary alone, Martha. What we know about Mary is that Mary listened intently to Jesus. That's what she did. So what she did as a result with breaking this expensive vial of perfume and ointment on Jesus was a result of her listening intently to his teachings. Mary was somebody who understood what Jesus said. She broke a jar of nard worth 1 year's wages. How much do you make a year when you were working? That's to the degree that she understood who this was and was reacting to this. She was not carried away by emotion, but rather she acted with faith and understanding. Why? Because she listened to what Jesus said. She understood who he was. She also had an object lesson of his power. Bold acts of faith originate in the heart and the mind. It's easy, is it not, to see somebody very, very enthusiastic about their worship and saying they're just worship in emotion. We don't know that all the time, do we? In Mary's case, it was a mistake, because one of the things we know about Mary that Scripture teaches us is she listened intently. She understood who he was. When he said, I am God and I am going to die and come again, she knew that that was going to happen. She understood that was going to happen, and she acted accordingly. This wasn't the carryings on of a raving lunatic. This was somebody who understood better than even the disciples probably what was about to happen, and acted accordingly. Standing watching her was Judas, the criticizer. We read in the other two accounts that record this event that other people besides Judas said, that ain't right, doing that. Judas, though, in this case, was the one that singled out. Judas said, hey, why didn't she sell it and give it to the poor? Now, didn't that sound pious? Didn't that sound like Judas had a heartbeat for the poor? That's the way he wanted to come off. Judas was in the showroom. Judas was thinking, I don't need to be fixed. I'm right. And that's what was going on. Wolves in sheep's clothing are not only in the world, folks. Wolves in sheep's clothing are found among the sheep. If they weren't found among the sheep, there's no reason for them to disguise themselves. They're disguised as sheep so they can get close to the sheep, so they can damage the sheep as much as possible. If a wolf comes from afar over the hill looking like a wolf, what happens to the flock? They scatter. But if he walks coming looking like a sheep, what happens to the flock? They just keep eating and whatever, and he moses around, and he's free to do all the damage he could do. Jesus says, watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. Judas, we find later, was indeed a wolf. He was dressed up as a sheep, but he wasn't a sheep. He wasn't a follower. He was there to do as much damage and to serve himself as much as he possibly could. I'm pretty proud of myself this morning. I'll tell you why. Last night, ladies, I did a very magnanimous thing. After supper, my wife and I took our regular places. She sits on the couch. I sit on the recliner. And we look at this huge, gigantic wall-sized television. And we watch things. And I have the remote, always, because I'm smarter than she is. And so last night, now listen, I'm not lying. You can ask her. Last night, I handed her the remote. I know. I still have my man card, but I gave her the remote. I let her choose, all right? And you're going to be real proud of me. I let her choose even though there was a Tampa Bay Lightning game on at the same time. I'm amazing. Right, I had it recorded. I'm nice, I'm not stupid. Anyway, we watched Antiques Roadshow, my favorite. Anyway, we watched Antiques Roadshow. I found a sermon illustration, so that's why God had me do it, I think. Somebody had some hands, they were about this tall, and they were just sculpted hands, and they were like this. And they were the hands cast from the hands of Rodin, who, of course, chiseled the thinker, right? And so they were famous. And so the lady was very thrilled. And she took it to the appraiser. And you could see on the face, I'm rich. I'm so stinking rich. I bought this for $500. I'm rich. The guy looks at the things for a moment. He goes, well, what we have here is the hands of Rodin from a casting. And she goes, I know. And I looked it up. And I think I know. And he goes, okay, all right. He didn't say this, but you could tell his eyes were saying, don't get carried away. He said, the problem is, this is a cast of Rodin's hands. He goes, I know it's a cast. He said, well, actually, it's a cast of a casting, of a casting, of a casting of Rodin's hands. As you look, there's no detail in the hands. The fingers don't have the robust details that the original casting has. How much did you pay for this? At this point, she was like $500. And you know that they're just being nice when they start nodding. Well, so yeah, you might get that. And so basically, what he said was this, and you see this all the time on Antiques Roadshow, just because something has a label doesn't mean it's real. And in this case, she thought she had the real deal, and she didn't. Folks, wolves are like that. It's only on close inspection after time that you can see that they are revealed as a wolf. Wolves in sheep's clothing do not discern the difference between works and worship. They have a skewed value system. They look at something and they think it's more important than the other thing. Jesus has a different value system, which is why he told Judas, leave her alone. She's doing exactly what she should be doing. Added in there, he could have said, if any of you knew what she knew, you'd be doing this too. His value was placed on the box, not on the gift. Wolves in sheep's clothing disguise themselves with insincere motives. Have you ever asked yourself, why did Judas do what he did? We find out in Luke 22, Satan entered Judas. Satan entered Judas. Now, maybe at that instant, but he was courting him the whole time. He was telling Judas all the wrong things, and Judas was listening. Now, that's an amazing thing to say when you realize that Judas was present for every sermon and saw every miracle. He had a tremendous capacity to get the gift and choose the box. And that's exactly what he did. Wolves in sheep's clothing are sometimes not revealed until the damage has occurred. You notice, I thought it was interesting, in each time when Judas is mentioned, they talk about how bad he was. It's crazy, right? Because Judas wasn't thought to be bad during the 3 years. It wasn't like the other 11 thought Judas was a terrible person. They made him charge of the money. You don't do that if you have doubts about somebody's character. They had no doubts about this wolf. That's how good his disguise was. Then we come to the third character in our play here, and that's Jesus, the justifier. Leave her alone. It was intended that she would save this perfume for the day of my burial. Jesus defended Mary's actions, and this befuddled many in the house. Why? Because their values were aligned with Judas's values. We don't understand why this is important. Jesus defended Mary's actions, and this befuddled many in the house, because we always have different values than Jesus if we don't follow him. Jesus places value where humans see waste. And that's what happened here. What Jesus says is important, humans will overlook and say, no, they're not that important at all. Time and time again, and almost in every instance, we see Jesus asking people to reevaluate what you think is important. The first shall be last, the last shall be first. You get more by giving it all away. All these values are turned around. And Jesus sees value where others see waste. And Jesus affirms our acts of worship while some see unnecessary extravagance. Why did Mary do this extravagant act of giving away a year's wages on perfume and poured them all over Jesus, so much that the whole house smelled of this wonderful fragrance? Why did she do that? She was doing nothing more than emulating the person she revered. She was imitating the person she thought the most of. Kids do that. When they're younger, you'll see them act like their parents. You'll see them playing with imaginary friends or their dolls or whatever else, and you'll see them act like their parents in many ways. Why? Because their parents are the most important people in their lives, and they pattern their lives after them. Mary's extravagance was in response to Jesus' extravagance to Mary and her family. What am I talking about? The third place we meet Mary in, actually it comes second, but the third thing I haven't mentioned yet is what? She raised her brother from the grave. Folks, her brother was dead and starting to smell. And Jesus raised him from the dead. Her other sister said, don't bring him out now, he's going to stink. He wasn't swooned, he wasn't in a coma, he was dead. Dead. They knew dead back then. And he was dead. And Jesus raised him from the dead. Does it look extravagant to you now to remember that Mary anointed Jesus with a year's wages worth of ointment? No. Why? She was just emulating what she'd seen from Jesus. He raised Lazarus, her brother, from the dead. Folks, how you and I worship is a reflection of how much we value what Jesus has done for us. Our worship is reflective of our understanding of what Jesus did for us. If we don't value it that much, our worship's going to reflect that. In Mary's case, when she valued it to that point, her worship reflected that. Judas, on the other hand, scolded her. What value did he put on Jesus' ability, his deity? He saw every miracle. He heard every sermon, yet chose to play with the box. Well, take this with you. Humans have a great capacity for willful blindness. Judas, in some ways, committed the same sin as Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve had every opportunity and every pleasure that God could give them in the garden, and still chose to turn their back on it. Judas saw up close and personal, with his own eyes and his own senses, every sermon, every work, every miracle Jesus did. Saw Jesus in his downtime, saw Jesus in his uptime, saw Jesus in all weathers, and still chose to refuse to believe. All of us are susceptible to that. Next, followers should expect discouragement from the lost when we worship Jesus. They're not going to understand why we do what we do. Lost people act like lost people. We shouldn't be surprised when they do, because they're lost. So they're not going to understand why we worship, why we sacrifice, why we do what we do. And Jesus will always defend a follower when they dedicate their bodies and their possessions to him. The reason I'm excited about Toby coming is I just want you to talk to Toby and just get to know him a little bit. I saw Toby with his whole family over in Burkina Faso. It's a different way of life over there. It was nice. I mean, it wasn't like, Gilligan's Island, but it also wasn't Spring Hill. It was nice. But boy, they were out of their element, and it was wonderful to see the dedication of these individuals to him and how God's blessing them because of it. How much of yourself and your possessions are you willing to surrender to Jesus? Mary kind of led the way. A year's wages, that's a lot. How have you asked yourself recently, have you come to the place where you would be willing to suffer the scoffing and mocking of others to worship Jesus extravagantly? And I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm asking us to open our eyes up and minds up to what Jesus would have us do. Have we come to him and said, what is it you want me to do? How is it that I can serve you? Some of us need to say, am I yours? Because I'm not sure if I am. I know about you, but I don't know if I know you as my Savior. This morning, you have an opportunity to say, I don't want to play around the edges here. I'm ready to jump deep into the deep end. Head first if I have to. I want to be sold out like Mary was sold out. I don't want to be someone like Judas who saw everything I needed to see, yet turned away. Folks, if you don't know Jesus as your Savior, right now that can change. Right now, that can be real to you. If you would like to, you can pray to him right now saying, Jesus, I want to be yours. Now, you may have some questions after this prayer is over that you're praying to him. And if you do, I'd love to talk with you. There's a place on this card we talked about that gives me an indication you like me to call you. It says, I'd like to know more about becoming a follower of Jesus. If you check that box, you'll be hearing from me. I would love to have that conversation with you. So check that box, put a name and a way to contact you, put it in the offering box for me, and you'll hear from me this week. Finally, I want you to know that God dwells above and beyond a wolf's ability to cause permanent destruction. Some of you may have been gnarled up by a wolf. Some of you may have had an experience in the church where someone who looked like they were one thing and found out later they were another had really done a number on you. Can I tell you something? God will use that. That's not beyond God's power to turn around and change. You're not a lost cause. All the anger you have, God can help you with and take away and replace with peace. Judas betrayed Jesus, didn't he? He betrayed Jesus, and Jesus went to the cross. Do you think Jesus was captured, beaten, and crucified because of Judas? Did God use Judas's betrayal to bring about the greatest, most wonderful thing ever happened? Yes. Why? Because God is above. God supersedes any attack of any wolf in any church, in any life. As we close this morning and prepare our hearts to take communion, I want you to know something. There's nothing that's gone on in your life, no matter by choice or by victimhood, that God cannot overcome. Why? Because Jesus bought and paid for that. He has the power. He makes roads out of rivers. He can turn your life into something glorious as you follow him. Jesus, I thank you. We thank you as we prepare for communion. We ask that you would help us turn our hearts towards you. Help us understand what these elements mean, the cup and the bread, a body and the blood that was shed. Bless us now, Father, as we celebrate. We don't do this, Father, to gain anything. This is a celebration for those who are already in the family. Bless us now as we commemorate, as we celebrate and remember the sacrifice of your Son. In Jesus' name, amen.